be starting in 1 minute. We'll be starting in 1 minute. Welcome to YNS Live and your next stop live. I will be there in 1 minute, just getting my camera on because something is going funko. I so apologize. My camera was not working and I've never had that happen. And so I tried to kind of like troubleshoot as I was on. So welcome to Your Next Stop Live. I am Juliet Hahn. I am the host of Your Next Stop Live. I'm also the host of Your Next Stop. I have a number of live other shows. One of them, two of them actually are on here. YNS Live with NFL Thread, and then YNS Live with NFL Thread Pivot. So if you guys are new to the show, welcome. This is live here on Fireside. Again, Your Next Stop Live. My name is Juliet Hahn, and I love Fireside. I've been with Fireside since almost the beginning, and it's one of my favorite platforms. So if you are on LinkedIn right now, hello. If you're on Twitch, YouTube, I think Facebook might be streaming there as well. Welcome to Your Next Stop Live. I am excited to share this with you. So another thing about me that others do not know, because I don't talk about it as much, is I do have a consulting business and I am a storytelling consultant. So I help you guys be able to formulate your stories, especially now that I've had this podcast for 2019. So you can do the math. Math is not my strong point, but I started it in November 2019 and I've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of guests on. And what I do is in my episodes, I always connect dots that people don't realize. And it's really fun as it unfolds. And a lot of my guests later will say, I didn't even think about that. So I didn't think that part of my story was important. So I'm going to give you guys a couple of tips of how I really get into the meat, how I realize it's an important part of the person's life, and then some tips for when you're on a podcast, when you're storytelling, when you're on stage, when you're doing the media circuits. So if you guys are here in the audience, welcome. If you want to ask some questions, please feel free to do that as well. Can you guys hear me loud enough? Let me know if you guys can up or do something if you hear. Great. Okay, perfect. Okay, so when I started, just to give you a little background, when I started this podcast in 2019, it was called Next Stop Crazy Town. Crazy Town is like very dear to my heart. I'm a mom of 3 teenagers right now and have 2 boxers. I have a husband. I have a very big extended family. I'm one of 5. So there's always, Crazy Town was kind of always like an energy that I love. I love just the energy of people, the dogs, the kids, people running around. I'm always kind of moving. I do sit on the couch and watch shows with my husband, but I am kind of like a moving kind of person. And so when I first started the podcast, it was really at a time in my life where my kids were getting older. They didn't need me as much. And I was feeling stuck in my creative world. If you do not know my whole story, please, there's a couple different podcasts out there, but you can also go to my website, which is here, to give you a little background. I am dyslexic, so school was really tough for me, but I did play two sports in college because that was where I really shined. But communicating, storytelling was always a kind of a key in my life, because when I spoke, I realized that people listened to me different, especially teachers, adults. They would stop and listen because I am very good at articulating. I'm very good at getting my words out verbally, but not on paper. So that's where the school struggled. So when I wanted to start something in my older life, I was, as I said, I was a little stuck in my creative world. I never saw myself as creative. And that brings me back to my story when I was little. And if you know this, you're gonna chuckle because you're like, okay, I hear the story all the time. But basically, all the class went off to gifted and talented. Myself and another boy went to special reading. And what I learned was, in my own words, is that I didn't go because I wasn't creative. It wasn't that I was dyslexic and I struggled in reading. It was that I wasn't creative. So the thing that really stunk was I kind of gave that narrative to myself at all times, but I was really good at communicating. I was good at talking to people. I was really good at sports. I had my strength, so I wasn't really ever insecure, but school was tough. So as I got older, my kids would come with me. Mom, can you help me with this arts and craft? No. I'm not creative. Go ask dad. I was the one that took them out to go run and jump in the mud and dig dirt and climb mountains and all of that stuff. That's how I really shined as a parent, give them the confidence. You can do this. Your body can move here and there. Creativity was not one of them. So when I started this podcast and completely fell in love with the creative side of it, I kind of laughed at myself and have changed that narrative that I'm not creative. I'm extremely creative. It's just I'm not good at drawing. And so I kind of thought creativity had to do that. So as I've gone on with my podcast journey and helping clients through this storytelling, which storytelling has been around for ages, as we all know, it's been around forever. And it is an art, and not everyone knows how to articulate their story. I've found with clients, and even having my own podcast, that a lot of times people don't know how to condense their story or elongate their story. So that is something that I teach through my consulting part of my company, because there's parts of your story that are actually really important. And sometimes people don't think of them as important. And I'm going to give you some kind of concrete evidence about this. I've had hundreds and hundreds of people that I've spoken to. And it always will surprise me when someone will bring up something in their story and say, it's really not a big deal. We can talk about it later. But I hear how they get kind of excited. I see their body language kind of move a little bit. And I'm like, wait a second, that's just not something little. That's something that they get excited about. So I always ask a question on that. So that's number one storytelling tip. When you're talking to someone, when you are a podcast guest or host or whatever you are, and you see someone get a little bit, like their posture stands up, their voice maybe gets a little faster, they get excitable, but it's the slightest little move. That's something they're passionate about, and that's something they can talk for hours. And so if you talk to them about it, it's really, really fascinating to then see where that part of their story goes. And I love that so much because it is so slight. And I say this all the time. There's a difference between hearing and listening and hearing. You could be listening to someone, but are you actually hearing them? Are you actually hearing what they're saying? And if you truly are, you'll pick up those little cues of when someone gets excited. The other thing is, I keep doing that because I didn't think my light was on. The other thing that's really important when you're a guest going on a podcast, and here's another tip, is to do a little research on the person that is the host. So listening to their podcast, hear how they really conduct themselves. Are they doing an interview more an interview style where it's questions, answers, question, answers, or is it more conversational? And I know that sounds so silly, but there's so many people that I've had on my podcast that when I have like a little, the one-on-one to see if they're a fit for my podcast, if their story is a fit, and they don't do their homework. They didn't listen to the way I share on my podcast. They didn't listen to my podcast is about conversations. And so a lot of times I'll turn those people down as guests because I'm like, you know what? And it's not the lack of homework, but it's the lack of knowing how to pitch me and talk to me and share a bit of their story, the storytelling piece again there. Stories connect us in such a way that sometimes it's downplayed. So whether you're a brand, you're an entrepreneur, you're a small business, an influencer, a micro influencer, even in the corporate world, it's really important that you know how to articulate your story in different time stamps. So going out on the podcast circuit is really the best way to get free advertising. I mean, it's really the best way to get your message out there. And sometimes the smaller podcasts versus the medium to large podcast, you're going to get more people that are interested because, it's like, okay, even if you had 150 people listen to your podcast and you're a small business that's getting, or you have a product that's getting your product into, or your business or your brand into 150 people's ears that you would never have connected with. So going on the podcast circuit is, I believe, very, very important for those people. As I said, small business, entrepreneur, micro influencer, brand, even someone in the business world that wants to move in the corporate ladder, going to networking events, it's really important, again, to be able to connect your story. And those are little snippets, right? So those are like you meet someone, you're talking to them for 5 minutes. How do you conduct yourself? How, what part of your story are you sharing with people in those realms? And I do that with all my clients. It's something that, I'm super passionate about. I love storytelling. I've loved it my entire life. I used to tell stories when I was little. I used to tell stories, to my kids. And it doesn't matter if it's my story or I'm making up a story. There's different ways that you engage audiences. And again, it's an art. It's not, some people have it, some people need help on it, but it is something people can learn. So there's a couple different tips when you're telling your story to be able to know how to articulate it in a couple different timestamps. So if you're going on a podcast and it's a 45-minute podcast versus a 20-minute podcast, you're going to need to know those parts of your stories that you're going to include. And the parts that maybe, this is not the time for this to come out. Maybe it will come out, but this is not the important part of my story. These are the important parts of my story. And so anyone in the audience, do you guys have any questions or any comments? Please, you can just go over to the React down here and feel free to jump up and ask. I don't have to put you on video. I can. And I know some people are at work right now, but welcome wherever you're listening to this. So learning about the host is an important thing. Knowing that you can also articulate your story in a number of different avenues. The other thing is listening, right? Listening or hearing, even if you're on a podcast and the host says something and you could see them get a little excited, add to what they're saying, and it just makes for a better conversation. The other thing, and I teach this a lot, if you are on podcasts, and it's storytelling, but it's also a way to kind of center yourself. If you're on a podcast or you're doing media circuits and you are not used to it and you move around a lot, have something underneath the table. I use little rocks, little shells that I get at the beach that you can rub. I have like a little clip, just something that you can keep your hands down because I've been doing this, you could guys see me, I'm using my hands a lot, but sometimes you hit the mic. I've been doing this as long that I know where now I can move my hands, but a lot of times I just try to keep my hands underneath the table. Not only does it keep me still, but it also keeps my mind very focused. So as a podcast host and as a podcast guest, it's really important that I am not going all over the place. I'm not going from here to there, to there, to there, and I'm confusing people. So if I do that, have this under the table, it stimulates my brain in a different way. So it kind of keeps me on track, which is really important. Now, does it always work? Are there times where there's distractions? No, but you're just trying to get yourself back centered. So again, I'm going to repeat a couple different things. If you're on a podcast or if you're on a stage, if you were on the media circuit, it's really important to be able to articulate your story in many different facets and many different time increments. There could be something where you're on you have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. You need to be able to think about the parts of the story that are connecting with the audience that you're speaking to. That's also very important. So you could have a 30-minute story and you're a brand, but this audience that you're trying to connect to is more of a medical audience. There's going to be parts you really want to focus on the brand part of your brand and the medical part of it. Now you're going to be on another podcast that actually their audience is about passion and excitement and stories. You're going to put in some of your stories that are really important. And again, I'm going to give you a little snippet here. One of my guests talked about a flower and she said, "Oh, this is just, it's really not a big deal. I can go into it a little bit," and I could see her perk up. And I said to her, "Can you explain to me what you were talking about with the pink peony?" And she lit up. And our conversation just went down this most beautiful path because it was something that was really dear to her heart. And I felt that when she said, all it was me hearing her just talk about this pink peony for 2 seconds. She's like, "Oh, that's a whole nother story." But I could see that it needed to be incorporated into this story. So listening and hearing, not just doing that, finding something that keeps you less distracted. So if it's something under the table you're rubbing, you could also do, there's clay, there's the squeezy balls, stress balls, whatever it is that's going to keep you focused and not all over the place is really important. And then if you're going on a podcast, if you are a guest, to do homework to make sure you see and hear how the guest how the host conducts her or himself, whether it's more of a conversational podcast or more of a interview style podcast. Even if you reach out to someone to say that you want to be on their podcast and maybe you heard like a little bit like, "Oh, I've just seen them all over social media. I know that that's a podcast I want to get on." Listen to an episode because you might not know how to have the conversation like that host does. And you need to do a little practicing before you jump on the call to try to pitch them because they're going to be able to feel it. So it's really important when you're doing that. It just gives the host a little bit, be like, "Okay, this person did my homework. I can just jump into this," instead of being like, "Okay, well, this is how I conduct my podcast." And it just gives a little bit more credibility. Again, if you guys have any questions, I know some of you are probably, in the audience there, if you might be at work, you might not have any questions, but you can always DM me at I am Juliet Hahn on Instagram. You can also email me at info@IamJulietHahn. My website is IamJulietHahn.com. There's other opportunities that I do, corporate events and all that kind of stuff. But my one-on-one consulting with the storytelling is on there. I also have a workshop to help people kind of find that passion and turn it into a business. That's a whole nother podcast, but that is something that also excites me. But I'm happy to answer any of your questions. I'm happy to really talk. This is something that's so passionate to me, and not a lot of people know, and I shouldn't say not a lot of people. There's a handful of people that know how to tell their story really well, but then there's ones that don't know how to really incorporate the little nuggets that maybe are important. And it's really fun as a podcast host to get to those nuggets on my podcast because there's what's going to connect. Those are little things that I know are going to connect with my audience. And those little things I know are going to connect with the audience at a greater connection because stories connect us. Another little story is I had this gentleman, he's an engineer, and then he went into business on his own. And now he helps people he's like helps people with their inventions. And I had asked him like a question about something in his childhood, and it was so exciting to see him perk up and then later say to me, "I haven't thought about that in literally 20 years. Thank you for asking me about that." That was a really good feeling. Like I got off your podcast and I just felt happy and good because it was something I haven't thought about. So again, if you're a host or a guest, these are the kind of things that are important to connect with people all together. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a small business, if you're an influencer, a micro-influencer, if you're a brand, even if you're in corporate America, think about parts of your story, and it could go way back from when you're little, that make you kind of giggle. And I know that sounds silly, but something that kind of makes you giggle, a little story that maybe happened to you remember when you were little. And sometimes it might not be a giggle, it might be like something that was uncomfortable. It wasn't great, but it's still a part of your story and it's still going to connect with more people. So that is the homework I want you guys to do. I want you to think about your life. Think about things that have made you excited and maybe not so excited, and think about how you can articulate those and if there are things that should be articulated. Again, thank you so much for joining Your Next Stop Live. This is live here on Fireside. This is my second series. I believe this is the second kind of storytelling series. I'm doing 3. This is the second part. If you may, the first part is living here on Fireside and actually will be going out next week on all the podcast players. Your Next Stop. If you have not subscribed, rated, and review, please go over there and do that on whatever your favorite podcast player is. And we will see you guys for another episode of either Your Next Stop Live, either YNS Live with NFL Thread or YNS Live with NFL Thread Pivot. We will see you guys later, and happy Tuesday. Thank you for all that joined. And again, this is Your Next Stop Live here on Fireside.